Hi everyone, I'm Harshit. Okay, so today I'll talk mostly about art and artificial intelligence. There'll be a few projects in the beginning which are sort of the work that I've been doing earlier. A lot of my interests, I live in the space between art and technology and always try to think of creating new tools for people to express themselves in different varieties of ways. I recently graduated from the Media Lab at MIT, where a lot of this work was done. And now I'm doing a fellowship at the Museum of Tomorrow. I just arrived like 10 days ago, and I'm here for a couple of months. All right, so starting with some of my earlier work, like I said, a lot of this is thinking about how technology can enhance our capabilities to create stuff. For example, this is a drawing tool that I created using drones. So the idea here is, as you sketch something, could there be a robotic or a machine thing that could extend your physical capabilities, like allow you to almost have infinite length arms, for example. And you can see this thing in action here. What's happening here is, as you draw something on a table, you're just moving your pen, and in real time, there's a drone that's drawing that for you at a far off canvas. So you can potentially like sit at your desk and draw, I don't know, in San Francisco from here, for example. And the idea is to really sort of liberate us from this physical binding that we have of our bodies and see how can we not have any sort of restrictions on what our minds wants to do. Like if we want to create something, how can we go ahead and do that? The second project, it's called Protopiper. The idea behind this, again, was sort of there's this traditional form of art, right, or sketching things, where you're sketching things on flat two-dimensional surfaces. The idea with this was, can we create a tool that allows us to build stuff within which we can be fully immersed, like that kitchen set, for example. So this is a handheld fabrication device. It works on regular tape, actually. So you use regular tape, create pipes out of it, and you build these big structures. And then you can experience sort of full body creation and then be immersed in your own creation. That's the whole idea with this. Lots of people have tried this. We've also open sourced this. So this is the instructions to build this are available on Instructables. And people create all these fun things, right? Like, for example, you create like a volleyball setup inside your living room, and then you can play with what you've created, which was fascinating. All right, so like I'm saying, like I like to think about technology and see how that could help build tools for creative expression, right? And there's this entire boom about artificial intelligence, and a lot of speakers have talked about that today. So of course, I was super interested and intrigued by what that means for creativity, right? Like, we always think of this machine thing as helping us solve our tasks and blah, blah, but can it really be creative? Is creativity unique to humans? And this is a question that'll get more, like, we'll discuss this more as the talk progresses. Give examples, and this is an open-ended question, right? I don't have an answer to this, but I'll try and put forward thoughts about this. So creativity and art, right? That's super fundamental to us. It's probably the thing that makes us human. Like, this is a cave painting, dates back almost 40,000 years ago. And people have been building and creating stuff forever. But one important thing to consider here is that art has always existed in a complex and evolving relation with technology. There's been technological progressions over the years, and a lot of things that we create, we think that it's all thought of by us, by our minds, and it comes from within, sort of, but there's always this relation with the tools that exist, right? Whatever you can create is almost sort of also affected by it, and in a way guides our ideas and guides our creative aspirations. So these, for example, were the tools that people used to create the cave paintings. probably you can, to some extent, argue because people started creating tools like these, cave paintings started to happen, or at least the form of paintings that happened were a result of the kind of tools that were created. And this is a thread that will continue through this thought. So what are tools essentially, right? Tools are traditionally thought of as extensions of our organs. There's fire, that's a tool that extends our digestive system, for example. There's wheels that extend our legs and help us move around in ways that we wouldn't have imagined without the existence of the tool of wheels. So is creativity also sort of this very tightly linked thing that's reliant on tools that we as a species develop? And one way of thinking of artificial intelligence is essentially of thinking it as a tool, right? It's a tool that's a tool for our brains. And that sort of is beginning to creep us out because it's really about the very things of thought and mind. And these are the things that we think that's very personal and very innate to us and stuff like that. We can not so much like get scared by the idea of having this tool of having this drone as a tool that extends your hand, or having this tape machine that extends your 2D sketches into 3D sketches. But once we think of having a tool for our brains that can think along with us, then we sort of start to creep out. And maybe like artificial intelligence or machine learning has existed for a long, long time, right? This is one of the earlier applications where people started to use it to recognize handwritten digits, to read checks, basically, so that you could automate that process. And people were okay with that. Yeah, why not? Why should a human do such a mundane task? Let's ask the machines to do that for us. And a lot of this work has been a result of this algorithm or technology called neural networks, which is the idea of basically creating a bunch of layers of neurons. And how that works is, for example, for that classification of the digits, right? If you pass in something like a 6 or a 7, it passes through the network and tries to predict what that digit is. This is a very condensed 1-minute intro of what neural networks are. But these are essentially behind a lot of the technologies that we see today, deep learning and stuff like that. And I mean, machine learning is a part of our day-to-day lives. There's like classification of emails as spam or not. And again, we're sort of cool with that. There's cars that are beginning to drive themselves, which is beginning to get a little scary, but we're still saying, okay, maybe it's not that bad. But what happens when they start creating art, right? And then all of a sudden, we're taken aback. I mean, these are all computer-generated images. This is from something that Google released last year. So all this is pretty new. It was mid-2015. And this is what's called deep dream, where a computer hallucinates images and comes up with its own images. And now we're getting scared. But like, to remind you of how complex our relation with art and technology has been, this is a quote that came out when photography was first introduced. Photography was this new tool which was opening up universes of expression, but people were like, it's blasphemous. It's almost unimaginable to have a process that on a click of a button you can capture what God himself has created, right? You can at most sit for long hours and paint what God has created. So you can create paintings of that, but to capture it in a second, it's almost playing God or cheating God. So things like this have always sort of come up when new technologies come up. And in some ways, I think artificial intelligence is a lot of that. This is something new. As we go along, we'll probably learn to live with it and not get super scared by it. Again, like going back to Deep Dream, and there's two major technologies that have revolutionized AI's use in art. One of them is this Deep Dream, where the idea essentially was, and some people touched upon this in earlier talks, that we're probably not even understanding what we're doing with these algorithms, right? So the idea with the neural networks, as I showed you, was to give an input image and ask the computer to tell you what it thinks that image is. And it learns, it figures out the internals of that neural network on its own. And Google tried to sort of visualize those internals and see, okay, what really is going on? If a computer tells something is a banana, why does it think it's a banana? Or if it tells it's a parachute. Now this one's interesting because here with the parachute, you can see a person is attached to the parachute. And this is Google's interpretation of what a parachute is. Because it's only seen parachute images with people attached to that. So it thinks that that's what a parachute is. And it's sort of beginning to get to the uncanny valley situation where machines are able to produce images super accurately. And again, this is interesting because dumbbells are always attached with a hand because it's never seen dumbbells without a hand. The other technique that's revolutionized art and artificial intelligence is the one about artistic style transfer. So you can essentially take an image and take a style image and be able to transfer that onto the original image. So the dog becomes this Van Gogh painting, essentially. And a lot of artists have jumped into this and created these fun experiments. Mona Lisa with all sorts of artistic styles with Google Maps and stuff like that. So my take on this was like going back to the thoughts of AI as this tool that extends the capabilities of our brain. Sort of co-creation becomes the key, right? How can we create with this new tool? It's not about can the machine produce art autonomously or can we live with the machines, but how can they help us become more creative? How can they help us expand our boundaries of creativity, things that we haven't thought of earlier, and help us create those things? So I created this project called Tandem, which is a drawing tool where you essentially draw with an artificial intelligence. It's a regular drawing software. You create some sketches, and then you ask the computer to imagine on top of it. So the computer comes up with this beautiful output, right? So what's happening here is there's some interesting things like it imagined the pen in the ink bottle to be a bird, and it completed the drawing around that, and the letters became these roads that lead to towers and stuff. Here's another example of that where the exclamation mark becomes a bird-like creature, and it fills in the rest of the drawing. These are, like, I'll cycle through some of these outputs. This one's pretty interesting for me because someone tried to create like trees in their original sketch, and the computer interpreted that as dogs and finished that drawing. So it's offering its own interpretation. It's making us think beyond what we would have thought of. And that's interesting to me because it's a tool that you can play with essentially, and it's pretty much a tool that knows a lot of the stuff that we know. It's learned a lot of the stuff that we've learned from. And here's trying to produce also like short art statements or captions of the drawings that the computer creates. So it's sort of getting meta. The computer is trying to also describe its drawings. This was done based on training the computer on romantic novels. So here's a fun output, like I had a man in close proximity to my sister. That's based on the drawing on the right, which the computer created on its own, based on the drawing on the left. And these are also some fun examples which sort of offer surprise to what you thought of and what the computer thinks of it. And one thing interesting you can also do with this tool is you can add personalities to the computer. So you can tell it to be a happy computer or a dark and a sort of a black-minded computer. And you can see those changes happening to the artwork that's produced. Taking very simple sketches and converting that into beautiful work, like an R2-D2 figure, I think. And you can go back and forth between these two. So you can, based on the computer's output, you can go back and change your input. So it becomes this creative dialogue process that you're having almost with another person, for example, or another person who's capable of producing artwork. And so to zoom out of this, right, and to sort of go back to this question of is creativity unique to humans? So one way of looking at all this is what we've done is we've trained the computer to essentially understand the world around us in pretty much the same way that we understand. So we've given it like millions of images and told it what each of those images means. And if you give it a new image, it can tell you, okay, this image probably means this. And that's very similar to how we experience the world visually. Like, we're trained by our parents, by our colleagues of what the world looks like. So that's sort of, I look at it as going forward through the neural network. And what happens when we reverse that process? That's when probably creativity happens, right? Once you've learned to analyze the world around you, if you flip that process, probably that's what creativity is all about, and that's essentially what humans also do to come up with new ideas, is to learn a bunch of stuff and then sort of flip it on its head and come up with new ideas. So probably it's not something that's restrictive to humans, or if you give a computer enough experience as the experience of humans, probably it comes up with new stuff on its own. So to me, sort of stepping back from the negative attributes of AI and the scary vision, it's more about expanding our own creative capabilities, thinking of just as the paintbrush did, can a paintbrush for our minds, for our imaginations. And there's some new work that I'm starting. This is based on a model of neural networks called recurrent neural networks, where there's neural networks that run on sequences of information. So this one's actually all computer-produced math garbage, basically. But you can see that there's a lot of cool structure to it. If you look at it arbitrarily, it looks like real work that's been produced. So the computer is beginning to learn how structures work across a particular range of inputs or across time, basically. And that can be applied to music, right? And this question's already been answered. Like, you can create music with AI, but again, there's this back and forth process, I think, that's very important to keep in mind. What can the computer produce for us? How can it help us expand our own interpretation of what music is and stuff like that? So like I said in the beginning, I'm working at the Museum of Tomorrow for some time, for 2 more months, trying to produce Brazilian music using artificial intelligence, more like samba, bossa nova. So if it's also a call to you guys, if any one of you is interested in these things, works with music, I'd love to speak with you after this talk. Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening.